In this fourth and final video on the history of American recreation, we'll look at the period since World War II. Now, after World War II, as the nation entered its post-war economic boom, car vacations spread as companies instituted 2-week paid vacations. Families would travel by car along the new interstate highways, and chain hotels would spring up where they'd stay, and they'd go to destinations like national parks. The growth of new massive amusement parks took place. For example, Disneyland in Southern California, which opened in 1955. The car culture of the 1950s led to the drive-in movie theater. After World War II, as the modern civil rights movement began to form, Major League Baseball became the first professional league to integrate when the Brooklyn Dodgers took the African-American player Jackie Robinson. Professional football and basketball soon followed. The civil rights movement of the post-war years had a profound effect on women's sports. In 1972, Congress passed the Education Amendments of 1972, which included the monumental Title IX. Title IX mandated that no educational institutions receiving federal funds could discriminate on the basis of gender. Now, this meant that all schools, from elementary school through college, had to treat and spend equally on men's and women's sports. The number and diversity of women's sports exploded. In high schools, the number of female athletes grew from approximately 300,000 in 1972 to millions today. The number of female athletes in college increased fivefold. After World War II, with a number of professional basketball leagues still competing, the Basketball Association of America was founded in New York City in 1946. 3 years later, it merged with the rival National Basketball League, and the two became the National Basketball Association, or as we know it today, the NBA. In the years after World War II, smaller rival basketball leagues to the NBA tried a three-point distance shot, but it was not until 1979 that the NBA adopted it. College basketball quickly followed. Part of the reason for the NBA's three-point shot was a viable challenge to the NBA's dominance of professional basketball. The American Basketball Association, or the ABA, formed in 1967, had a three-point shot and a more rapid freewheeling style of play that caught on with fans. The ABA, unlike earlier leagues, was profitable, and it employed a flashy red, white, and blue ball. Anyway, in 1976, the NBA and the ABA merged. The theater remained popular in the post-World War II years, with a number of famous playwrights and plays, but the number of theaters declined with the spread of television. Vaudeville died out, and attending a theater play became more of an event. Theaters adapted well to the changing times, perhaps evidenced by the popularity of the hit play Hair, shown here in the 1960s. Movies remained popular, with Hollywood regularly cranking out blockbuster films, productions that increasingly cost into the tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars. The spread of the multiplex movie theaters grew, often built alongside or as part of malls. Running became a huge national obsession in the 1970s after the 1972 Olympics marathon victory of American Frank Shorter, shown here on the left, and also the publication of Jim Fixx's best-selling book, The Complete Book on Running, published in 1977, shown on the right. By the late 20th century, outdoor recreation, including hunting and fishing, but also activities such as kayaking or skiing and so forth, had become billion-dollar industries. A big development in the late 20th century was the spread of free agency in sports, which allowed individual players greater freedom of movement between teams and thus considerably more money. This was contentious and at times led to player strikes, usually negotiated with salary caps for teams. Professional baseball was the first in the 1970s and the NFL the last in the 1990s. With television contracts, the money in sports was truly amazing, and marketing allowed players and teams additional revenue. In 1967, the NFL held its first Super Bowl, won by the Green Bay Packers. The Super Bowl has become, of course, almost a national holiday celebrated on television. Recognizing the growing popularity and acceptance of women's sports, the NBA helped organize the Women's National Basketball Association, or WNBA, in 1996. Entertainment stars, be they actors or sports figures, became increasingly wealthy and famous. America's celebrity culture is still growing from the 1920s. You can see Michael Jordan, the famed basketball player, on the left in the 1980s, and George Clooney, the famous actor, on the right. Fads came and went. Some of the more popular fads of the recent past includes the Rubik's Cube, shown on the left, and the board game Trivial Pursuit, among many others, shown on the right. Of course, in recent years, the growth of computer games has profoundly influenced leisure times. In the 1980s, video arcade games were popular, but with better technology, games for personal computers spread, facilitated, of course, by the internet. Today, computer game competitions are big business. In recent years, with the growth of the internet, fantasy sports have allowed fans to participate watching their favorite pro stars play. By the 21st century, debates over selecting a national collegiate football championship had led to several reforms in the college bowl games. Ultimately, in 2014, creating a 4-team tournament rotating among the major bowls, the College Football Playoff Series. By this point, the NCAA had established tiers of competition, depending on the money, attendance, and scholarships offered. Today, in all major sports, the debate rages over whether the student athletes should get paid since it's become such a big business. Finally, in recent years, there's been the growth of extreme sports. These sports involve such speed, height, or personal level of exertion that there's a high level of risk. In any event, this concludes the fourth and last video on the history of American recreation.